The morning Viola Ashby agreed to become a stranger's housekeeper and wife, she had exactly $4.11 to her name. A carpetbag with a broken latch held shut by a piece of twine, and a letter from a man she'd never met that said, in plain handwriting, "I have 2 children and a failing ranch, and I cannot pay you much, but you will have a roof and 3 meals and no one will bother you here." She had read that letter 11 times on the stagecoach west, not because she believed it, but because she was trying to find the lie in it. Every man she'd trusted in the last 2 years had eventually revealed one. The stagecoach dropped her in Hardwick, Colorado on a Tuesday in late October, when the aspens had already gone gold and the wind off the mountains had teeth in it. She stood in the dust of the main street with her carpetbag at her feet and looked around at a town that appeared to be doing its level best to disappear. 2 saloons, a general store, a church that needed paint, a sheriff's office with a cracked window someone had stuffed with burlap. A boy was waiting by the post office, maybe 10 years old, sandy-haired, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile a while back. He was holding a sign with her name on it, which meant someone had thought to teach him his letters, which told her something. "Miss Ashby," he said, though it came out flat, like a statement rather than a question. "That's me. Pa sent me." He said to say he's sorry he couldn't come himself. The north fence went down again. He picked up her carpetbag before she could stop him and started walking toward a wagon. "I'm Dex. My sister's Opal. She's 6. She doesn't talk to strangers much." "That's all right," Viola said, following him. "I'm not much for talking either." Dex glanced back at her with something that might have been cautious approval. The ride out to the Callaway ranch took 40 minutes on a road that wanted to be a road and hadn't quite gotten there. Dex drove the wagon with the focused competence of a boy who'd been doing it for years, which probably meant he had. The mountains were enormous to the west, going purple in the afternoon light. The land between here and there was wide and dry and beautiful in the way that things with no mercy could be beautiful. "What happened to the fence?" she asked, mostly to have something to say. "Someone cut it." Dex kept his eyes on the road. "Cattle get out?" "6 head. Pa found 4 of them." Viola heard what he didn't say. 2 head gone. In November, with winter prices, that was money they likely couldn't afford to lose. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. Main house, barn, 2 outbuildings, all of it weathered silver gray. A windmill turning slow in the afternoon air. A kitchen garden that had gone to frost. The whole place had the look of something that used to be cared for, and was now being kept alive by sheer stubbornness. A man was coming in from the north pasture on horseback as they pulled up to the house. He rode well, easy in the saddle, but when he dismounted, Viola saw why he'd sent the boy instead of coming himself. His right hand came off the saddle horn last, and she saw the way he held it against his side, stiff and careful, the fingers not quite closing right. A bad burned scar ran up from his wrist and disappeared under his sleeve. He caught her looking and his face went flat. "Miss Ashby." He didn't offer the hand. "I'm Harlow Calloway." He paused. "The letter was honest. I want you to know that up front." He was maybe 38, lean and weathered, with dark eyes that looked like they'd seen things he hadn't asked to see. His jaw was set in the way of someone who'd gotten used to bracing himself. Not a hard man, she thought. A man who'd been made hard by something specific. "I believe it was," she said. "I'm here, aren't I?" Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. "Come inside. Opal's been baking since this morning. I think she burned the biscuits twice, but she won't admit it." The kitchen smelled like scorched flour and wood smoke. A small girl with 2 brown braids was standing at the stove with the expression of someone defending a military position. She looked at Viola and did not say anything. "Opal," Harlow said. The girl looked at her father, then back at Viola, then at the biscuits on the iron tray, which were, in fact, dark around the edges. "They're fine," Opal said. "They look fine to me," Viola said, which was not exactly the truth, but also not a lie that would hurt anyone. Opal seemed to take the measure of that and decided it was acceptable. She slid the tray onto the table. That night, after the children were in bed and the dishes were done, Harlow Calloway sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her the rules in the same flat, direct way the letter had been written. "Your room is the one at the top of the stairs. The lock works. The kids know to knock." He looked at his scarred hand instead of at her. "I pay $12 a month. Cooking, cleaning, help with Dex's schoolwork. Anything beyond that, we talk about it first. And the rest?" She kept her voice level. She'd learned that directness was the only thing that actually saved time. He met her eyes then. "This is a practical arrangement. I needed someone capable. You needed somewhere to be. That's the start and the end of it." "All right." She folded her hands on the table. "My husband died 14 months ago. His business partner took everything before the body was cold. I've been working as a seamstress in Pueblo for almost a year, but the woman who owned the shop died and her son sold it. I came west because I had no better option." She paused. I'm not sentimental about it. I just thought you should know. Harlow was quiet for a moment. The hand. He turned it over on the table so she could see the scar clearly. The skin was puckered and tight, the fingers slightly contracted. Barn fire, 3 years ago. My wife went in to get the children out. She got them out. She didn't make it herself. He said it without inflection. The way people said things they'd had to say many times until the words stopped feeling like anything. Dex knows. Opal was too young to understand. She knows her mother is gone. That's what she knows. Viola thought about saying she was sorry, but she'd had too many empty sorries said to her in the last year to think they were worth much. Instead, she said, "The hand. Does it give you much trouble in the cold?" He looked at her with something like surprise. "Yes. My father had a burn scar on his palm. My mother used to rub lard and beeswax into it every night in winter, helped with the tightness. I could do the same if you'd want." He said nothing for long enough that she thought she'd overstepped. "Not yet," he said finally. "But thank you." She went upstairs and locked her door and lay in the dark listening to the wind come down off the mountains. And for the first time in 14 months, she slept without dreaming about the sound of her husband's business partner's voice reading a list of debts she hadn't known existed. She woke before the children, made coffee, got the stove going. Harlow came in from morning chores with frost on his shoulders and sat down without a word. She put a plate in front of him. He ate without comment. She sat across from him with her own coffee, and they existed in the same silence like two people who'd agreed on something without discussing it. That was how the first week went. She found the rhythms of the house. Dex up at 5:30 to help with animals before school. Opal up at 6, still in her nightgown, carrying a rag doll with one eye missing. Harlow moving through the cold dark hours before dawn, the sound of his boots on the porch a kind of anchor. She learned the land too, walked it in the afternoons when the children were at school and Harlow was out working. Nearly 240 acres, most of it good cattle country. But the fences were ragged, and the herd was thinner than it should have been for a spread this size. She counted the cattle twice, because she didn't believe the first number. 43 head where there should have been 60 or 70. On the 8th day, she found the cut fence for the second time. She'd gone out to check the kitchen garden for anything worth salvaging before the next hard frost, when she saw the gap in the eastern line. Clean cut, not broken, wire ends twisted back together hastily, the way someone had done it fast and didn't particularly care if it looked natural. Fresh boot prints in the mud on both sides, 2 different sizes. They'd come in from the road that ran along the eastern edge of the property and gone back out the same way. She told Harlow at supper. He set down his fork. "Where exactly?" "Eastern boundary, where the property line meets the county road." His jaw tightened. Dex was watching his father with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to read adult faces for weather. "Wolves?" Opal asked hopefully. She'd been reading a library book about wolves. "No wolves, Opal." Harlow pushed back from the table. "I'll look in the morning." That night, Viola went through the house looking for she wasn't sure what. Something felt wrong in a way she recognized but couldn't name yet. In the parlor, she found a small desk with a locked drawer. She wasn't about to open someone's locked drawer. But on top of the desk, under a coffee cup being used as a paperweight, was a stack of correspondence she didn't mean to read and then couldn't stop reading once she'd started. Supply invoices, feed orders, correspondence with buyers in Denver. None of it was her business, but the numbers were, because the numbers were wrong. She'd kept her husband's books for 4 years. Before that, she'd helped her father run a small dry goods operation in Tennessee. She understood how margins were supposed to work, what things were supposed to cost, where the money was supposed to go. These invoices were wrong. Feed costs running double what she'd paid when she sourced the same supplier for her father. A rejected cattle contract from 6 months ago with no explanation attached. A letter from a Denver buyer saying he'd heard concerns about the quality of Callaway stock and had decided to go with another supplier instead. Heard concerns from whom? She set the papers back exactly as she'd found them and replaced the coffee cup. At breakfast, she said, carefully, "The feed invoices. Who handles those?" Harlow looked up. "Dunmore, Regis Dunmore. He owns the feed and supply operation in Hardwick. He's also the one who arranges most of the cattle contracts. Has the connections I don't, Dunmore?" She repeated. "He's been helpful. Since the accident, I couldn't travel the way I used to with the hand the way it is. He offered to handle the business end." Harlow's voice was measured, but she heard something underneath it. Not suspicion. Something more tired than that. Resignation to a story he'd already told himself. She thought about the invoices. She thought about the cut fence and the missing cattle. She thought about the Denver buyer who'd heard concerns. How long has Dunmore been arranging things? Harlow was quiet. About 2 years. And before that? Before that, the ranch was profitable. He said it slowly like he was hearing the words for the first time, even though he was the one saying them. She cleared the plates. She was still thinking about it that afternoon when Opal came in from school and immediately said, "Mr. Dunmore came to see Papa today." Viola kept washing dishes. Did? He talked for a long time. Papa didn't look happy. Opal set her lunch pail on the counter. Mr. Dunmore always looks happy. That evening Harlow was quiet in a different way than his usual quiet. He sat by the window after supper with his bad hand resting on his knee and stared at the dark pasture. Viola let him alone for a while and then set a cup of coffee at his elbow. "He wants me to sell," Harlow said without preamble. "Has a buyer interested, says it's a fair price." She sat down. "Is it? Fair enough. More than I'd get if I waited until the ranch fails on its own." He looked at the coffee. He says that's where it's headed. Failing on its own. What do you think? I think he might be right. He said it quietly, and that quietness had more weight than shouting would have. "I can't work the land the way I could before. The hand doesn't close right. I can't rope. I can't do half of what needs doing. I've been watching this place fall apart for 2 years, and I can't stop it." Viola thought carefully about what to say next. "May I look at the books?" she asked. "The real ones, not just the invoices, the full ledger." He looked at her directly. "Why? Because I used to keep my husband's accounts, and the numbers I've seen don't add up." She watched him weigh it. Pride on one side, something else on the other, the same something that had made him write an honest letter to a stranger and mean it. "Top shelf in the bedroom," he said. "Brown cover." She found the ledger and spent the next 2 hours at the kitchen table, while Harlow sat nearby, pretending to mend harness and actually watching her work. The full picture was worse than the invoices alone had suggested. The ranch's income had dropped steadily over the last 24 months. Supply costs had climbed. Contracts had fallen through, and through it all, one name appeared again and again in the margins. Per RD, arranged through Dunmore. Dunmore negotiating. Dunmore's recommendation. She looked up. The cattle buyer in Denver, the one who sent the letter about concerns. "Do you have his name? Whitfield? James Whitfield. Does meat packing east of Denver? Can you write to him? And say what? Ask him what concerns he heard and who told him." Harlow set down the harness. He understood. She could see it in his face, the way the pieces were assembling themselves into a shape he hadn't wanted to look at. "Dunmore arranged that contract," he said. "Yes, and he arranged the one that fell through before it. Yes." The fire in the stove popped. Outside the wind was coming up. "If I'm right about what I think I'm seeing," Viola said carefully, "then someone has been making sure this ranch fails. Slowly enough that it looks like bad luck, and that same someone has been offering to help all along." Harlow put his head back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. When he looked at her again, his eyes were flat and cold in a way she hadn't seen from him yet. "His land runs north of mine," he said. "Always has. But the county road access goes through my property. If he owned both parcels, he'd control the only decent route to the railhead for this whole district." He paused. "I never thought. He's been out here for 15 years. He helped me after Ellen died. Sat with the children while I was at the doctor, I thought." He stopped. She understood what he wasn't saying. The specific grief of being betrayed by someone you'd let yourself trust when trust was the one thing you had left. "Don't say anything to him yet," she said. "Don't change anything. Write the letter to Whitfield. Let me keep going through the books." She kept her voice level and watched the eastern fence. He nodded once. Something in his face shifted, not toward hope exactly, but away from the particular kind of despair that came from feeling alone in an impossible thing. She woke that night to the smell of smoke. Not close. Distant. She went to the window and saw a faint orange glow from the direction of the old equipment shed near the eastern tree line. By the time she'd gotten downstairs and out the door, Harlow was already moving, the children behind him in the doorway, Dex holding Opal back by the arm. The shed was fully involved by the time they got to it. Nothing to do but keep the fire from spreading, digging breaks in the dry grass, beating out sparks, working until her hands were raw and her lungs burned with smoke. Harlow worked beside her without speaking, his bad hand wrapped in a cloth, doing things that had to be costing him. He didn't stop. When it was down to coals and they were standing in the dark looking at each other, black-faced and exhausted, she said, deliberately set. "I know. Multiple points of origin. I know." He looked at the wreckage. That's a message. She thought about the cut fence and the missing cattle and the invoices that didn't add up. She thought about a man who'd sat with grieving children and arranged cattle contracts and helped a widow get a fair price on her husband's land, and had been dismantling this ranch piece by piece for 2 years. "We need to get ahead of him," she said, "before he moves again." They went to see Sheriff Brandt in Hardwick the next morning. He was a spare, careful man who asked good questions and wrote down the answers. He looked at the invoices she'd copied by hand. He listened to what she said about the Denver contract. "Dunmore's well regarded in this county," he said finally. I know. She kept her voice steady. That's how it's worked. Brant looked at Harlow. You believe this? I believe the numbers, Harlow said. And I believe the shed didn't light itself. Brant said he'd look into it. He said it in a way that made her think he actually would. The reply from James Whitfield in Denver arrived 8 days later. Harlow read it at the breakfast table, said nothing, and passed it to Viola. She read it twice. Whitfield confirmed that Regis Dunmore had contacted him 4 months ago with concerns about the quality of Callaway cattle and the reliability of Callaway's operation. He'd suggested Whitfield would be better served doing business with a newer, more stable supplier. He'd offered to be that supplier himself at a price slightly below Callaway's contracted rate. Whitfield had agreed. He expressed regret if this had caused difficulty. One contract, Harlow said. Proof of one thing. It's enough to open the question. They took it to Brant. He added it to what he called his file. He'd already found, he told them, that 2 other cattlemen in the district had received similar approaches from Dunmore after their operations began struggling. In one case, Dunmore had purchased the land outright at a price below market. In the other, the family had simply left. That's a pattern, Brant said. Yes, Viola said. It is. 2 days later, Dunmore came to the ranch. He rode up on a Tuesday afternoon when Harlow was in the south pasture and Viola was in the kitchen with Opal, helping her practice her letters. She heard the horse and looked out the window and felt something settle cold in her stomach. She went out to meet him on the porch. He was a large, well-dressed man, maybe 50, with a handsome face and the kind of easy authority that came from years of people doing what he wanted. He smiled at her like they were old friends. Mrs. Ashby, I've been meaning to come out and introduce myself properly. I understand you've been helping Harlow with the books. His tone was warm and entirely calculated. That's good of you. He's been struggling. He's managing fine. Dunmore looked at the house, the barn, the sagging fences in the middle distance. I wonder. His expression shifted to something that was performing concern. I've been worried about him for a long time. A man can only take so much. The fire last week on top of everything else. He shook his head. I have a buyer ready to make a fair offer. Good terms. It would give Harlow the chance to start fresh somewhere easier. I'll mention it to him, she said. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. Just something to consider. He held it out. She took it because refusing would signal more than she wanted to signal yet. I hope you'll encourage him to think seriously about it. For his sake? For the children's sake. She said nothing. He smiled again and rode away, and she stood on the porch until he was gone and then went inside and stood at the kitchen table for a long moment, with her hands flat on the surface, thinking. Who was that? Opal asked. A man who thinks he's being helpful, Viola said. Opal seemed to consider this seriously. Is he? No. That evening she sat with Harlow and laid it out the way she saw it. The invoices, the Denver contract, the 2 other ranches Brant had mentioned, the offer he'd just renewed, the shape of a plan that had been running for 2 years, maybe longer, patient and methodical and disguised at every step as kindness. Harlow listened without speaking. His bad hand was resting on the table and she could see the tendons tight under the scar. Why didn't I see it, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Because you were grieving, she said. And he was kind when you needed kindness. That's how it works. The kindness is real at the beginning, and by the time it's not, you've stopped being able to imagine it any other way. He looked at her. How do you know that? My husband's business partner. She kept her voice even. 19 months of being a good friend, helping with the accounts, offering advice, sitting at our table for Sunday dinners. She looked at her hands. When Edmund died, the man had papers ready. Debts I'd never heard of. Agreements Edmund had supposedly signed. The lawyer said it was all in order. The judge agreed. She paused. I couldn't prove otherwise. So I left. Silence. I'm sorry, Harlow said, and she believed it. I am too, but it means I recognize the shape of this. She looked at the folded offer paper sitting between them. He's been patient because he thought he had time. The fire means he's getting less patient. So what do? We make him think he's won. She met his eyes. Tell him you're considering the offer. Let word get around that the fire was the last straw. And then we watch. Harlow's jaw worked. Pride fighting against something more practical. You're asking me to look beaten. I'm asking you to let him think you are. There's a difference. After a long moment, he said, all right. He was convincing. She hadn't expected how convincing he'd be, but she thought maybe she should have, because a man who'd swallowed his pride every day for 2 years to keep going had learned how to wear suffering without showing the seams. He went to town, talked to the blacksmith, mentioned he'd been thinking about the offer. The story moved through Hardwick at the speed of a small town story, which was fast. 3 days later, a note appeared under the door. Ready to deal. Come to the old Pickett homestead. Tomorrow night after dark. Bring the deed. She took it to Brant. He read it twice and looked up. This is him moving to close, she said. So we close first. They planned it out around Brant's kitchen table. 2 deputies positioned in the old picket house before nightfall, a third riding behind at a distance, Viola and Harlow arriving openly as expected. The goal was to get Dunmore to say something explicit on his own ground, something the deputies could testify to. She told Harlow about it that night. He said, "You're coming with me?" "Yes, Viola." He said her name the way people said things they'd been working up to. "You don't have to do this. This isn't your fight. You've been here 6 weeks. No one would fault you for." "I know," she said. "I'm going anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face that she wasn't ready to name yet. "Then we go together," he said. The Pickett homestead was a hollow shell of a house on the edge of district land. Abandoned for years, they rode out in the dark with the moon 3/4 full and the wind cold enough to sting. No stars visible, a storm building somewhere to the north. The deputies were already inside, invisible. She and Harlow dismounted at the tree line and walked toward the house. Dunmore was waiting. 2 men flanked him. Working men, hired not invested. "Harlow," Dunmore's voice was warm as always. "I'm glad you came to your senses." He looked at Viola. "Though I didn't expect an audience." "She's my wife," Harlow said. "She goes where I go." Dunmore smiled. "As you like." He produced papers from his coat, transfer of deed pre-written, fair terms. "Generous, actually, given the state of things. Sign tonight and you can be out by spring." Harlow took the papers and looked at them. "One question," he said. "The Denver contract, Whitfield. Did you approach him?" Dunmore's smile didn't waver. "I may have mentioned I had supply capacity, after telling him my cattle were diseased." A pause, slight. "I expressed concerns. I genuinely had them. And the feed invoices, double market rate, inflation affects everyone. And the fences, accidents happen on rural properties. You know that better than anyone." The warmth in his voice had a sharper edge now, but none of that matters. What matters is that you're here and you're ready to sign and we can end this gracefully. "What about the fire?" Viola said. Dunmore looked at her. For the first time, the performance slipped. Just slightly, just enough. "Fires happen," he said. "That one happened in 4 places at once," she said. "I counted the origin points in the morning." The 2 hired men were watching Dunmore now, recalibrating. "Sign the papers, Harlow," Dunmore said. The warmth was gone. "You're done out here. You have been for 2 years. I gave you time to see it yourself and you didn't, so here we are." "Here we are," Harlow agreed. He didn't sign. He looked toward the house. Brant stepped out from the doorway. The 2 deputies came around from the sides. Dunmore moved fast for a big man. His hand went to his coat and Viola was already moving, throwing herself sideways into his arm before she'd decided to do it. Her elbow connecting with his forearm as the pistol came up, the shot going into the ground, both of them going down hard. She heard Harlow shout. She heard boots on the ground, running. She had Dunmore's wrist with both hands, and she held on with everything she had until someone else's hands were there too. Brant pulling the pistol clear, deputies pulling Dunmore up, the world resolving itself back into order around her. She sat in the jerk, breathing. Harlow was beside her. He'd gone down on his knees, which had to be costing him something, and he was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen from him. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She checked herself. "Nothing but dirt and a scraped palm." "Are you?" "No." He didn't move, just stayed there looking at her. "That was stupid. Probably you could have been shot, but I wasn't." He put his good hand on her shoulder, steady and warm, and she felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a long time. Behind them, Brant was reading Dunmore his charges. Dunmore was saying nothing, which Brant had told her was usually what the guilty ones did. Once they understood, it was over. They rode home slow, side by side, the storm coming in from the north now, first flakes of snow starting to fall. "I want to ask you something," Harlow said. The snow was settling on his shoulders, and he didn't seem to notice. She waited. "When this is finished, after the trial, after everything settles." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I'd like this to be a real marriage, if you're willing." He paused. "Not an obligation. I want to be clear about that. You could leave after this, and I'd consider the debt paid 10 times over. But I'm asking because I want to, not because I need to." Viola thought about the letter she'd read 11 times on the stagecoach. "No one will bother you here." She thought about what it felt like to be in a house with children and wood smoke, and a man who didn't waste words and meant the ones he used. She thought about how she'd known, somewhere around the 3rd week, that she wasn't counting the days anymore. "I'm not leaving," she said. He looked at her then. The snow was coming harder, and his face in the white dark was open in a way she hadn't seen it before. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, the snow filling in the hoof prints behind them. Dunmore's trial came 3 months later, in February, when the county seat was buried in snow and the courtroom was standing room only. Brant had built a careful case. The Whitfield letter, the testimony of the other ranchers who'd received similar approaches. a man named Purdy who'd worked for Dunmore and agreed to testify in exchange for leniency, who described being told to cut fences and scatter cattle and make it look like negligence. The invoices Viola had copied by hand, compared line by line against the county's own supply pricing records. Dunmore's lawyer was good. He questioned Viola's motives, her recent arrival, her convenient access to the household records. She told the truth, and she told it plainly, and she kept her eyes on the jury while she did it. The jury took 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. She heard Opal make a small sound, and looked down to find the girl had taken her hand at some point during the verdict. Dex was very still beside his father, doing the thing he'd been doing since she first met him, watching his father's face for weather. Harlow's face, for once, was not weathered. He looked like a man who'd set down something heavy after a very long time, and was still working out how to stand upright without it. Outside the courthouse, the February light was hard and clean on the snow. Harlow stood for a moment, just breathing it in. "Done," he said. "Done," she agreed. They went home. Spring came late to that part of Colorado, the way it always did, reluctant and then sudden. One morning in April, she looked out the kitchen window, and the pasture was green, actually green, after months of brown and gray, and she stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Harlow came in from morning chores and stood behind her at the window. He put his hand on her shoulder, the scarred one, and she took it without thinking about it, just the way she did every morning now. "The Whitmore family wants to know if we'll sell them the grazing lease on the north section," he said. "What do you think?" "I think it's fair money and we could use it." He paused. "But I want to know what you think." She'd been thinking it over since he'd mentioned it the week before. She understood the land now the way she'd never understood land before, the water rights and the grass cycles, and which sections were worth more in which seasons. She'd started keeping the books in earnest 3 months ago, and the numbers were finally carefully moving the right direction. "Take the lease," she said, "and use the money to repair the north fence properly. Not patch it, redo it. That's expensive. It's an investment." He was quiet for a moment. "You're better at this than I am. I'm better at the numbers. You're better at the cattle. Between the two of us, we're one full rancher." That got a sound from him that was almost a laugh. She'd learned that about him. That humor came out of him sideways, unexpected, like water finding its way through rock. Dex came in stamping mud off his boots, announcing that one of the new calves had gotten itself stuck in the creek mud again, and someone needed to come help get it out. Harlow went. Viola made coffee and watched through the window as her husband and her stepson worked the small disaster of the stuck calf with the focused practical energy of people who had learned that problems were just work waiting to be done. Opal appeared at her elbow. She did that, appeared, quiet as smoke. She was holding the one-eyed rag doll and looking out the window at her father and brother. "Is Mr. Dunmore going to come back?" she asked. "No," Viola said. "He's gone." "Good." Opal leaned against her arm with the easy unself-consciousness of a child who to someone was safe. "I didn't like him. Why not?" Opal thought about it with the seriousness she brought to most things. "He smiled too much. Papa says people who smile that much are usually selling something." Viola thought about that. "Your papa's right." The calf was out of the creek mud. She could see Harlow laughing, actually laughing, at something Dex had said. The sound carried away by the wind before it reached her, but the shape of it clear through the glass. She thought about the letter she'd read 11 times on the stagecoach. Thought about what she'd come looking for and what she'd found instead, which was harder and better and nothing she could have planned for. Thought about how the worst year of her life had deposited her, by a series of accidents and desperation and one honest letter, exactly where she was supposed to be. Not safe, exactly. Safety was an illusion she'd stopped believing in. But home, the real kind, the kind that wasn't given to you but built piece by piece out of shared work and shared trouble and the daily choice to stay. Opal was still leaning against her arm. The calf was back in the pasture. Outside, the green was coming in.